This is kind of a big question, and we'll have a go at answering it. But
meaning of life.
Yeah. What is the meaning of life? When was the moment that you realized that software was eating the world and that you needed to be in a tech company to propel you into the future?
Yeah, good question. So I had a mindset for a while that I wanted to be a management consultant, which a lot of people do want to do. So I kind of studied accounting, was involved with professional services, and then through a couple of programs I did in law school, I was exposed to this tech world. And kind of Australia was pretty nascent at that time, and so it was called Law Without Walls was the program. I went over to the US and pitched an idea to kind of investors. We didn't go anywhere with it, but I got exposed to that community, and then came back, did the Sydney Uni Incubate Startup Program, and just started realizing that all these entrepreneurs were building fascinating companies, and I had to be part of it. I wanted to create things, not just advise people on how to operate within a legal framework, but there's really, in tech age is no barrier, and these entrepreneurs at a bunch of different ages were launching huge billion-dollar companies and creating things. So definitely wanted to be part of that. So a bit of a combination of a couple of programs, the Incubate program and also this Law Without Walls program.
How did you go about sort of discovering and filtering job opportunities to find opportunities in LinkedIn and then again at Canva?
Yeah, so I think I'm a bit different to a lot of folks in that they kind of subscribe to the belief that you need to test something out before you actually go down that path. So I'm very deliberate with my career decisions. I think you spend most of your life in a career, so 8 hours plus a day, most of the week. So I take my career decisions very kind of seriously. How did I filter the options is the question. So I was looking, kind of had a few different avenues that I could go down, which I was very fortunate to do. Mostly were professional services, so accounting, law, finance related things. I had a real interest in LinkedIn's product at the time, and so I knew they had a Sydney office open, and so kind of had to make this decision. Do I go to this tech company that doesn't, your parents are not too familiar with, think it's a website, or do you go do something more traditional and build skills to then transition into one of those later? I then came to the thinking that why not just, if you want to try and get somewhere, why not just go straight there rather than kind of do these, risk averse hedges to go into consulting and then and so I was like, I definitely want to go into tech. It's super exciting. I could see all the companies growing, and that's how I decided to go in that LinkedIn direction, and then. So I was kind of aware of my option universe. I'd obviously gone to job sites, careers fairs, all those types of things. And then I guess can talk to the Canva opportunity as well. But take your advice. So happy to do that too.
Yeah, I guess I just want to touch on sort of when you were first exposed to LinkedIn and you had a law background, how did you sort of see what non-technical roles there were that you could slot in from your background?
Yeah, it's a good point. I think some companies aren't as tied to the fact that if you've studied X, you have to study X to do Y. So the role that I went into is, if you look at tech businesses, especially US tech businesses, they often open Sydney offices because it's a strong economy. They open sales offices, and so when they're kind of more younger in their journeys, and especially junior type sales roles, they're more worried about can you sell rather than did you study business?
Okay.
And so that kind of led me, the jobs and the conversations I had with LinkedIn at the time indicated that it didn't really matter what I'd studied. And so I think as a branding point of view, people are generally, some people find it impressive if you study those types of degrees, but it wasn't the reason I got the job, but they also didn't really care the background. They tested me for sales rather than for, like legal specific things.
How did you pick up the sales skill? Was it something that you learned from the job, or was it something that you had a hidden talent for that you didn't know until you went in the interview and you're like, oh wow, I'm actually really good at selling?
Yeah, it's hard. I think so I'd probably start by saying there's a really good, for those watching, there's a really good YouTube video online called What Stanford Doesn't Teach You About Entrepreneurship or Similar. And so there's one of the panelists is called Will Price, and he talks about that's often these MBAs want to go into these specific paths, and no one wants to go into sales.
Oh, yeah.
And really, if at the core of business, hiring, raising money, effectively generating revenue, you have to have some sales competency, and so I'd say it's an important skill to have. That's the starting point. How did I develop the skills? Probably mostly on the job. Mm-hmm. So really just like hitting the phones and learning things the hard way. I guess mentored, started in a role that when you start in a sales role, especially at a junior level, you typically take on more lead generation work, and then you progress into full sales cycle things. Mostly learned on the job, hadn't really had proper exposure to it in the past.
Yeah, I agree with the whole people need to learn how to sell, and here we call it storytelling, because every time as a founder or a joiner, if you're trying to attract new employees, you're trying to tell your family and friends what you're doing, or even raising capital, you need to be able to articulate what your vision is, and that is a part in itself, selling something, like convincing people of doing stuff. So that's actually a really awesome skill to have. And how did you kind of sort of go from sales role to different sort of more product oriented role without a sort of technical background?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think a lot of people are interested in this topic. I get kind of hit up quite a bit for folks trying to understand, if I'm doing this kind of sales role, how do you transition? So in the sales kind of organization context, the roles are typically like product consulting. Okay. So you're not actually building the product, but you're advising people how to use it most effectively. So you partner with sales reps to kind of to perform that role. That's kind of how I started to do that. I also did a bunch of stuff in my free time. I really found I had an interest to build things. When I was at LinkedIn, I was pretty much the only person in Australia participating in these hack day events. So I was connected pretty closely to the product organization that way. I guess what I realized was if you want to be in a product role, pretty typically you have to be at a headquarters, because all the research and development or like engineering product design work is happening in an HQ. And so in order to do that, I would have had to go to the US with LinkedIn, but instead kind of found my way into Canva and I've really loved that experience.
How did you find your way into Canva?
Yeah, so the true story is actually through the startup program I did. Through that startup program, I'd actually met Mel and Cliff. It was 2013. I've reminded them of this. I don't think they would have remembered me at the time, which is totally fine. I think, but really saw, I guess met them for the first time. Had a couple of drinks after. So that was my first exposure to Canva. And then after that, I'd connected with a couple of folks. I was actually Canva was an account of mine at LinkedIn's, and then an opportunity came up, and so they'd reached out to me. It was pretty good timing, and then seeing the trajectory they were on, I was like, this is one of the most world-class companies to join. Full stop. So it was even more higher performing than some US companies. So it was a pretty easy choice, and so went through the interview process, worked really hard through that, and then have found my way in.
And where did you start off when you first joined? Which team or division?
Yeah, so started in international growth and product, but mostly working on kind of growing Canva. I was part of a couple of things. So one was we launched our SEO pages in Russia. So had absolutely no experience doing that before, but I was supporting that effort. And then also we did a partnership with KDDI, which is public. That's like a telco. And so I was involved with some partnership pieces of work there. So launched that, and then so that's where I kind of started in Canva. Yeah.
And just want to take a step back and contrast sort of a more traditional corporate environment where there is a lot more guidance in your role, and you can sort of look to someone and say, okay, that's how he did it, or there's a lot more mentoring. Whereas in a startup, you sort of, they trust you to do it yourself. How did you navigate that?
Yeah. I think that's a big transition point for a lot of people in these more traditional spaces. If you go to like a big consulting firm or a bank or in a big accounting firm, they have kind of like clear-cut trajectories. They have like extremely formal systems, and we've grown to develop those, which is great. But at a really early stage of a company, you have to really figure it out yourself. And I was at the point where I was so hungry to build stuff, and it was a bit difficult to do that at LinkedIn from Sydney outside the product org. That I wanted to be in a company. I kind of was striving for that. I really wanted to go into a company and kind of have that freedom. But I'd say it's not easy. I think we often meet a lot of people from those backgrounds, and I think a lot of the people probably on this kind of conference today or live stream today, are really high performing, switched on, high achieving people. But you have to really be comfortable that there's not an answer for everything, and there's not perfect process for everything at an early stage of a company. So you have to kind of step up, learn a lot of stuff, and be open to that.
Yeah, so this is a good segue into a question that I got from the previous live stream, which we didn't really address. But I think this is a perfect question for you because you've got experience actually hiring and building teams within tech companies. So Dan wanted to know, how do these companies look for a team member, and do they have any expectations from someone coming out of a corporate background?
Yeah, so hi Dan, if you're watching. I think there's a few key points to this. So I guess what do you look for in people coming from those backgrounds? I think it depends on the role, but there's some traits that I think you look for in startup employees, which is a good way to answer the question. So I wrote about this in an article I wrote recently. So firstly, you need to have initiative. So, and again, a lot of these are buzzwords, and people watching will be like, oh yeah, this is like, that seems nice, but pay attention, because it's like important for startups. Initiative. So really what that means is, if there's a problem, go and fix it, or find a solution and work with the team to solve it. So that's really important. And, work might not always get delegated perfectly. It's like, things are breaking, and, be thoughtful about how you're going to solve that, and respectfully come up with ways to work with others to solve it.
Yeah, and I just want to quickly touch on that, because when I was at a corporate, my mindset was, there's always someone checking my work, and then it's sort of like I can sort of hand my responsibility over, and it doesn't feel like it's all on me. But in a startup, when you're sort of like the buck stops with you, it's just like such a different change in mindset. You're like, I have to make this work, or otherwise we're going to die, or just that kind of initiative is just...
Yeah, exactly. Like, I think you see, even in my friends that have gone into consulting, it's like analysts kind of are delegated the work, the mid-level managers kind of manage the analysts, and then the principals or directors kind of have oversight on that. And then the partners do the business development, all that kind of stuff. So it's different, but I'll keep answering your questions. So so adaptability. I'll work through these pretty quickly. So
take your time. We don't have questions right now. Take your time.
Okay. All right. So adaptability. So your roles will change a lot. I've had a lot of different roles. We can talk about that later at Canva. You have to be adaptable. I think professional services people have this mindset of like, I applied for X. This is the role scope. It's quite specific. You have to be willing to kind of go with the flow and solve whatever big problems need to be solved. There's a few really good examples of that at Canva of folks that have done that.
Can you touch on that example?
So there's with maybe not to name names, but There are people that have kind of moved between really different things. So customer happiness, they might be solving a support-related problem, in transition into people operations, or and solve like a people-related issue. There might be people in growth teams that go and work in product roles, and that fluidity is a lot more extensive the earlier you are in a company, because it's less formally structured. So being adaptable is really important. Patience and persistence is really important. So you often kind of don't see the fruits of your labor for a while in a startup, and it's not easy to get stuff off the ground and create things from nothing. So you have to be patient. You can't expect to be newsworthy every day. There's a lot of work that goes into creating those highlights. Couple last points, and we can dive in depending on however you want to get more granular. But so being open to feedback is really important. I think, especially when it's in these professional services contexts, there might be like more formal processes, and again, we've developed those over time, which is great. But I'm talking about startups generally, you might not have those rhythms, as formally structured. So kind of being open to feedback, just based on the speed that companies move, is really important. Passion and ambition, massive buzzwords, but you've got to care about what you're doing, because it's hard. And so if you're passionate, it's really important. And then being able to collaborate. In startups, you have designers, engineers, QA folks, you have product management, you have operations team members, and you often need to effectively work with every single one of them, and work with their perspectives and opinions to come up with outcomes and get projects delivered. So you have to be kind of comfortable collaborating no matter what role you're in. Hopefully that helped.
No, definitely. No, that's super useful, and I'll link your blog again so that people can actually read through that. This is kind of a big question, and we'll have a go at answering it. But
meaning of life.
What is the meaning of life? We've got a lot of feedback that people want to understand the types of roles in startups, and we did kind of briefly touch on the roles that you've had. But if we were to sort of run through some examples of non-technical roles and kind of how that looks, because for example, there's growth roles, but people don't know what growth is. So if you want to maybe touch on that a little bit.
So maybe just with the audience, trying to think about the kinds of roles that could be available to everyone on the live stream. So the one obvious starting point is taking your skills in-house. Which is not necessarily that area, but if you're a lawyer, you can become an in-house legal counsel, or if you're in an audit role, you could work in the internal audit team of the company. I guess what's probably more interesting for people on the call is how do I transition into different roles? And what are those roles? So product management is a pretty hot topic at the moment. Really, the role there is to figure out what to build and why to build it, and then work with a team to ship and deliver internet products. And that could be enterprise software or consumer software. And so that's a really cross-discipline role. A lot of companies in the US require, more mature companies require technical backgrounds, whereas a lot don't. We've found that can be, you can be trained into those roles, but often there is a degree of expertise that's required. So that's kind of the product piece. Growth is really about growing the product according to the different parts of the growth funnel. So, acquiring users, activating them, all the way through to retaining them, and then getting them to refer people into your product. So it's that whole growth cycle. The skills there are really internet marketing skills. And there's I've learned through my time at Canva the concept of a T-shaped skill set. What that means is you're quite deep or knowledgeable on one particular area. So it could be paid marketing, and then you have a good understanding of the other types of ways that internet products can grow. I think from the perspective of, there's another article I wrote, so I've got plenty of material, but there's a lot of different avenues for people to go into if you're finance or law or consulting, etc. Because especially in some of those roles, it's all about problem solving. Other areas might be like, and this applies to a bunch of companies I've seen, corporate development is one, so it's like internal M&A. If you're in a banking role, sales is another role. I think don't be afraid of sales, by the way. And again, I'm a big advocate for learning that skill. It's not as unsexy as you think it is. And it's obviously a performance-based role in a lot of cases too. So I can keep going into detail, but hopefully, that was useful.
Yeah. What's been the personal question? What's been your favorite role so far?
I've got a pretty cool role at the moment. So I'm kind of in between product managing a product which allows Canva to be integrated into different platforms, but also looking after some of those partnership discussions with people looking to perform that integration. That's been awesome because I get to figure out what to build, what the roadmap looks like, and work with a lot of people internally to make the product available and shipped. But then I also get to take that feedback and perspective from the actual partners and work on that integration as well with them. And so it's a bit of a hybrid of like sales, partnershipsy stuff, but also product management stuff. And that's been awesome. But I've done lots of things that I've really enjoyed as well.
Yeah. And how do you so in product management, you're kind of managing a wider, it's sort of a product, and it can get quite technical. How do you
bridge the gap? So I think it's a very common question again. There's a wonderful guy who I'm a big fan of in the product management world called Sachin Rekhi. Hope I've pronounced your name correctly. But basically, it's really helpful to have a technical understanding, and that's why some companies kind of mandate it, but it's not required in a lot of companies. So how do you bridge that gap? I think it's really having an understanding of like the architecture of a product. And you can do that if you've got friends in engineering to just run you through how a product works. And so that could be, terms that were more unfamiliar to me before I joined Canva were like back-end services, front-end services, front-end infrastructure. And again, I'm not an engineer by trade, so but learning the architecture in terms of how a product's built is good, and the way you can do that is probably by pairing with an engineer that knows what they're doing. And then just kind of over time, you start to kind of learn a lot about if you want to build X, that will impact all these other things. And that will help give you technical appreciation and knowledge that can make you a more effective product manager.
So you don't have to learn to code on the side?
I don't think it hurts. Okay. So I did a 10-week front-end course, but my code absolutely sucks. And so, it's really helpful. And I think, but I think showing an interest and a passion and respect for engineers is really important, because if you don't have that, you're effectively asking folks to perform a task that you don't understand how that will work. And so it is okay to not know, but at the same time, the level of collaboration improves a lot if you have a little bit of respect and understanding for how the work you're proposing and the products you're proposing to be built impact on engineering.
And what skill sets did you kind of leverage from your past? So have a law background, how does that come into play into startup, or does it come to play at all?
Good question. I think so accounting, when I started accounting, they called it the language of business as the sell in, and so that's really good to that's a really good starting point just to understand some simple concepts around how business works. The legal side, where that's become relevant is in a startup. If you're performing a role, like let's say you're starting a company, you have to incorporate a company. Everything is effectively any transaction or user agreement, or if a user signs up, has all these legal implications. And so you can either outsource that, or if you know what you're doing, you can probably work with some templated docs to create them yourself. So that's if you're starting a company. Inside a company, where it's been relevant is if I'm doing partnership discussions, that'll obviously have a legal agreement attached to it. And so just being able to like read a clause, know how to interpret a contract has been helpful. Again, hasn't been a requirement of the job, but it's like, always useful to have. So yeah, I'd say probably that's where it's come into play. It hasn't hurt, hasn't been required, but it's definitely helped.
Awesome. Got a first question.
Oh, cool. There you go. There are people.
Hello. I actually know who said this. So.
Oh, that's good.
Any advice for coping with uncertainty and the lack of a clear career path?
I think you're probably trained to care about like career progression. And that's what usually, again, this is oversimplifying it and generalizing it, but typically if you studied really hard at high school, you wanted to get into the best program, then you wanted to get into the best graduate program, and then once you're in that, then you want to kind of like see some clarity and path to achieving some career goal. And then that's what a lot of these big mature professional service firms provide is they're like, in 2 years you'll have this job title, and then you'll have this competency framework to work off to achieve the next level and the next level. In startups, again, it's kind of your role shifts and changes. Unless you might be a software developer or something like that, and you don't want to take on other types of responsibilities, maybe your technical craft stays in that space. But if you're probably on this live stream, I'm guessing that you would take on one of those roles we mentioned earlier, like operations, product, or growth. And the career definition isn't as clear in a lot of startup businesses, particularly at an early stage. And I think you just need to be comfortable with that. So if you're really worried about having like a ladder, then startups are not necessarily, I would argue, the best place to achieve that.
And I was also I was listening to a podcast. I think it was called Invest Like the Best, and there was a guy, Josh Wolf from Lux Capital, that talked about linear thinkers. So there are some people that know A to B and they just want to get there as fast as possible. But he's the type of person that's very much like, I don't know what the next big opportunity is, so I'm going to make the most of it and go to every event, listen to the live streams, read everything, talk to everyone, because he has information anxiety about the fear of missing out on information. And that makes him a good investor because he's actually quite open to new things coming in rather than being very focused in that tunnel vision.
Well, it's I was just, as you're describing that, I think one thing came to mind is like, for whoever voiced that question, I'd be asking yourself why that matters to you, and then maybe question how important it is. So, why does it matter? Because it gives me certainty, that I'll be in a certain position at this point. But why does that matter? And I think you start, I don't know, maybe as your career goes on, you start to care more about what you're doing in your role and who you're working with, less so than like how quickly you're progressing. And
I also heard good advice that when you're thinking about career, know what you're optimizing for. So if you're optimizing for status or money and things like that, it's quite hard to kind of clearly define a path to get there in an uncertain environment. But if you're optimizing for learning and just constantly growing, it's not necessarily that stuff won't come. It might come even more because you're just propelling yourself in a new opportunity, but you're always, I think, just optimizing for personal development is always the best way to go. That's like within your control, and it's something that is truly truly fulfilling versus sort of external validation and things like that as well.
And the flip side is that you have an opportunity cost in not exploring some of these tech roles or different roles, right? So yes, someone else that might have gone down that more traditional path would have that clarity, but at the same time, the folks that have deviated onto a different path, maybe a startup or a technology related path, don't know where they could end up. And that end place might be way more interesting and fascinating. And so I guess it's a personal choice. Mine is obviously the startup tech route, because I'm just excited. All these new problems come up, all these new roles come up, and I'm just loving being part of discovering them and not knowing where I'm going to finish.
Yeah, that's awesome. Another question. For a corporate lawyer, which startup role has the smallest skills gap? And I think you might have answered that.
I guess so let's obviously say like in-house lawyer, but you're probably not interested in that if you're looking to leave. I think it's a good question. If you're a lawyer, where could you go into? I think operational roles typically. So operations, I'll kind of explain what I mean by that, because it's a broad term. It's really all the business functions that make the organization tick. But it might not be like a sales side of the business, or it might not be a product side of the business, but it might be like typically defined, and again, there's variances of opinion here, but maybe an HR type of team, a recruitment type of team, a finance type of team, and a legal type of team. So all of those could be collectively aggregated into operations in some companies. And so if you're a lawyer looking to transition in, if you were to go into an HR role, everything that relates to human resources often has like legal complications, right? So you have employment law acts that you have to work with. And so you often see, and I studied this a lot, lawyers wanting to leave law, they can't kind of go straight into finance because it's quite discipline specific knowledge. They could transition, but it's harder to. What they typically end up doing is, if you were to be in-house and then you wanted to kind of veer off into a more commercial direction, then an operations type of role typically to me is the way that those folks navigate across in a way that is a small skill gap.
Yeah. And with HR, like people in startup don't really call it HR anymore. They call it people, or just people ops and stuff. Yeah, and I think like that actually plays a much more important role than you think if you're starting in a small organization, because you're pretty much shaping the trajectory of your company with the type of people that you're hiring in. So you're making very, very important decisions of like, how do we bring the best people and how do we retain them? How do we grow this company? And it's actually a massive responsibility. It's just like one of those.
And again, another point is, I think, try and focus on less about the first role you're in. I meet a lot of people just because I'm personally interested in helping people find their dream job. But I meet a lot of people that are really trying to find the perfect role and then optimize for that. If you optimize for the best company on the best trajectory, the role kind of like often takes care of itself. And I don't want to promise you that on this live stream, but more opportunities come to companies that are kind of growing quicker. And then the earlier you join, the more types of different responsibility sets you're more likely to have. And so even if you start in a different role, there might be a problem over here, and if you're working with somebody that kind of can make that hiring call to say, I don't mind if you go and do that work, you're more likely to be able to kind of find a different path. So don't optimize for the exact role you want. Try and look at like companies on a great trajectory, solving problems you care about. Because if you care about what they're doing, that's really important. It'll motivate you to rock up every day. And then if you're on a successful path, then opportunities will come left, right, and center typically.
Reminds me of that Sheryl Sandberg quote of if you
rocket
get it, if you get offered a seat in the rocket ship, don't ask which seat. I kind of feel like that in this current role for me, and Blackbird kind of does operate like a startup because we're a small team of like 12 people. And initially when I joined, I was doing a certain role, but over time it's just there's flexibility in sort of deciding what more you want to do off and things like that as well. And so I guess like the main thing would be, don't be afraid to just sort of go in like and just see what happens. And I mean, like it usually turns out quite good. I mean, I'm not only talking for myself, but it's I mean, this isn't my day job, and I'm doing this because, people are encouraging, and so just
that's good.
Yeah,
it's like there are various factors that make up your happiness in a role, and one of them might be the work you're performing, and that's totally a relevant consideration. But if you're also working around awesome people, that can play a factor in your career satisfaction too. So, I work with wonderful people at Canva. That's why I've stayed there. And, it's not necessarily because I get to do a specific job. There's a holistic view of like, what is my employment experience? Who am I working with? What are my work conditions? All of those things. And that's how you should be thinking about it too. Yep.
Awesome. Just changing route a little bit, and this is another question from a previous live stream, which you might be able to help answer. Mark was interested in hearing the logistics of joining a startup. How did you sort of prepare financially? Did you have any family obligations, and how did you prepare to switch into a role that doesn't have that safety net of a guaranteed, you can stay there for a lifetime kind of role? Yeah.
Plenty of thoughts here. So I guess I can't say that I had the family considerations as much. I was still in my kind of mid-20s-ish when I stepped into startup context. But the way I kind of thought through it was, yes, there's certainty with those roles, but let's be honest, if you are working every day in a role you're unhappy with, that's a cost. And so go and do something you care about, and even if it is a step back. I won't talk about specifics in my case, but even if it's a slight step back to where you're currently at, what are the other things that could come out of an opportunity in technology? And often there's different components to a package that could change your mindset there too. But I think, how do you prepare for it? I guess understand what the opportunity is. So figure out what the offer is, figure out what your obligations are. Again, it's a personal choice. You might have family commitments that you have to be mindful of. But also if it's like, I just have to take a little bit of a step down from this well-paying corporate job to do all these things I love. Like if you're 70 or 80 years old, wandering around, your house or your retirement home, do you want to look back and think, I made the safe choice? Or do you want to have a crack and
not have any regrets of the what ifs?
And I would also argue that I see technology businesses as a lower risk profile than some of those traditional paths. And the reason is because technology is absolutely disrupting them too. And so if you look at how those they're businesses, right? Professional services firms, how they're kind of having to shift and change with the new world of things. My view is you're probably safer to go into the tech space where the majority of the largest companies in the world are technology businesses. It's incredibly cost effective these days to start a tech business. So don't just assume that because there's a carved out path today that's going to be the safest bet in 10 years either.
Yeah, and also there's a bit of misconception that if you join a startup, you'll be, going back to university life, eating ramen and things like that. But I mean, most startups, and maybe it's a misuse of word, it could be upstarts or whatever, they generally provide a lot of support, and in terms of way to build wealth, there's this thing called ESOP as well, so employee share option scheme. Is that what it planned? Yeah, that's what it stands for. And I guess if you join sort of like a startup sort of after Series A, and they have, recently raised and have a nice sort of like ESOP plan, you might be able to even scale your wealth faster as your company grows, as you help build the company as well, versus being on a salary job with like capped bonuses each year, just in terms of the financials.
And the other thing is sales. So what was surprising is all my friends that got like, you know, a 99 UAI and all these fancy professional services graduate positions like made the cut. There was also, when I went to LinkedIn, these high performing salespeople that are on, you know, variable comp, and they're killing it, but they get rewarded for that too. So again, it's like, and I think that's a very big unknown to a lot of people on this live stream. It's like, is those types of considerations as well. And the last comment, sorry, I'm talking a lot.
No, go for it.
But I reckon there's kinds of different categories of tech businesses as well. There's like startup, like seed funding. We're trying to prove that this idea we've got works and there's traction. That's risky, like, or more risky. Then there's like, we've raised, you know, maybe a couple of rounds of funding, and our product's starting to take off, and we need to grow it and like, you know, effectively expand the business or scale it up. That's tranche 2. Tranche 3 is like, I'm a mature tech business, and we are kind of a market leader or one of the top market leaders. We might have thousands of people. I recommend that second tranche, and that's because it's especially if you're a bit more risk averse. The first category is hard, and I think you probably see businesses all the time in that phase, and it's not an easy phase. The second tranche is like exciting, and there can be explosive growth, and that's the journey I've been on, which I've absolutely loved. And then the third tranche is more mature businesses, and maybe even categorize that as a corporate. So
yeah. I've seen some people keep working their way down because they want to work in a smaller and smaller team because it becomes more efficient if you're like working in a smaller team. So it's just like that might be a good transitioning sort of
So
strategy.
it depends how the company's structured as well, right? So even you know, it's well publicized. Canva's trying to adopt a model of a group of startups, and so to try and keep that culture. But yeah, definitely look at the company and how it's organized and to help inform that choice. Yeah.
Awesome. I just want to mention that we're approaching our last sort of minutes in the live stream. If you have any other questions, there's a big question at the end. this is I'll just say the best for last, but it's actually from one of my friends that listened to live streams before and sort of read articles of people that are quite successful, and he said that generally in public we only talk about a speaker's highlight reel, which is you know, they face success after success, but we both know that in real life that's not the case, and everyone's faced some sort of failure. So I was wondering if you don't mind, could you share your low light reel and sort of share what's been some of the toughest times you faced in your career, and how did you go about overcoming them?
So some of my professional services experience was pretty tough, but this is more in the context of the other types of roles. So starting a business, I tried to have a crack at that. That was really hard. You learn like you have to do everything. You have to speak to customers. You have to hire a team. You have to build a product, ship it, get traction. That's tough, and that's not a smooth sail often. I tried to pitch a similar idea inside LinkedIn, and that was really hard, and it eventually didn't get okay, but I tried everything and anything to get it off the ground. And so putting in that much work and effort and energy into something that ultimately doesn't get realized is tricky. And then I'd say on the hyper growth side, and I've written about this as well, so no secret, but because your company is growing, and if you're taking on these extra responsibilities, your personal growth is accelerated. So you typically, you might be exposed to things that you wouldn't be exposed for 10 or 20 more years at a big company. And so you have to want that. And so be prepared to take on, like to kind of grow yourself a lot faster. And so, you know, you might be managing a team for the first time. You might be, you know, needing to deliver things a lot quicker than you're used to. And so I guess it's not necessarily a low light, but it's a challenging position to be in. And so if you're coming from a place where it's a bit more sheltered, you have like all these peers around you to review everything you've done, multiple times, and then like you have it's a kind of stepping stone progression to where you want to go. It's different in a startup, and you might need to, if your company's doubling every year, you need to grow quickly. So that's a challenge.
And just digging a little bit deeper into that, are there any examples or anecdotes that you remember distinctively of like, that was really hard? For example, your first memory of managing a team or having to have those tough conversations.
Yeah, I'll be honest here. I think that was tricky when I had to really step up and take on like managerial responsibilities. And so I think I was able to seek a lot of internal mentorship to get me through that. But I've come out, I think, a much more effective individual. And so I would have had to learn that at some point, but I guess because I was exposed to different roles pretty quickly, which was a real privilege, I had to kind of take on these responsibilities and, let's say, managing or not managing or coordinating folks in a cross-discipline way, that can present challenges, right? So I really kind of studied myself, studied how I was responding to different instances, and sought the counsel, as I said, of people that were really effective at doing that. And then through that was able to kind of progress and learn and become a little bit more capable than I was in the first place. Yeah.
Awesome. And the last thing that I wanted to touch on was so the side project that you're doing. I think it's super relevant for this topic, and it could definitely help a lot of people. So if you wanted to sort of talk about that, sure. What it's called, what it does.
Preface by saying speaking in my speaking kind of in a different capacity here, but one of the things I personally care about, and I try and take that into my work as well, is to help people figure out what to do with their lives. So before I joined, and again, I guess it's on my LinkedIn so you can see it, I tried to start a company to effectively solve the problem that students didn't know what career universe existed, and then professionals, like a bunch of folks on the live stream today, wanted to transition careers once they hit a point where they got a bit disenchanted with this corporate world and this professional services world, and there wasn't really a platform to achieve this. All the job sites kind of ask you to type in what you want to search for, and my thinking was, well, most people don't know what options they've got. So I created this platform. It's called Job GPS. Just like, it's a side project separate to my current role, but tried to grow that, and before I joined LinkedIn, and then took that concept internally. The idea is that it'll show you details about different role types, and then also what kinds of opportunities might exist based on what you're currently doing. So whether that's what you've studied or what job you're in.
Yeah, awesome. And I think that it's relevant for this conversation because it does touch on topics like what does a product manager do and things like that as well. So if you wanted to check that out and give Mike any feedback on the website. But thanks so much for joining us today. And I just wanted to leave you guys with a CTA, a call to action to join our group on LinkedIn. It's called Creator Mode, and that's one word. And that's just where we all gather to talk about this type of stuff, people with corporate backgrounds or people that are interested in joining startups or starting their own startups as well. And I'll post a recording of this video and also other events in that group. But thanks, Mike, for coming in for a chat.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
No worries. And I'll catch you hopefully next month. See you guys, and I'll try and figure out how to close this channel.
Nice to speak, everyone. Thanks for joining.
See ya.